Okay, so welcome back. Last episode, we recorded the mix. We did a 30-second test. We saved everything as a WAV file, and we made sure that we had a clean track list ready to go. Now, if you haven't watched that one yet, do that first. This is step 4, and this is where the mix gets polished. We're going into Audacity to edit and master the recording, and by the end of this episode, you'll have 2 finished files ready to publish, a WAV and an MP3. So, first things first, if you don't already have Audacity, go and get it. It's free, it's open source, and it's genuinely powerful for what we need it to do. I'll put a link in the description below. So once Audacity is open, import the WAV file that we exported in the last episode. Go File, Import, Audio, and there's your mix, laid out as a waveform. Now the work begins. The first thing we do is trim the start and the end of the recording. So for the opening, the goal is pretty simple. You need to grab your listener's attention within the first 5 seconds. If your first track has a long intro, so for example, it's like a minute and a half of just beats before anything interesting happens, cut that out. You need to start your mix at a point where something is actually happening. Maybe it's a melody, a bass line, a vocal hook, something that makes a person want to keep listening. If your opening track already has a strong start, then great, leave it as is. I always tend to begin with a quick fade in, just 2 or 3 seconds ramp up. It's a subtle touch, but that's what gives the mix a professional feel right from the outset. So here I'm just going to highlight the first 2 or 3 seconds of the waveform. I'm going to go to Effect and then select Fade In. Done. And then for the end, the same thinking applies. You don't need to play out every last beat of the final track. Find where the natural energy dips, usually around 2/3 of the way through the last record, and then start your fade out from there. So highlight the last few seconds, go to Effect and select Fade Out, and keep your fade to around 3 to 5 seconds and keep it clean and simple. Now this is where the headroom that we talked about in episode 3 becomes important. Recording at a lower level means that we have clean audio to work with here, without any clipping or distortion baked in from the start. And that's exactly what we need. We're going to run through 2 steps in sequence, normalize, then limit, then normalize again. So go to Effect and select Normalize. Set the peak to 0 dB and apply. What this does is it analyzes the entire waveform and brings it to the loudest peak up to 0 dB, which effectively makes the whole mix as loud as it can relative to that peak. You'll see the waveform visually increase in size, and that's the volume increasing across the board. The second step here is applying the legacy limiter. Go to the effect and find the legacy limiter. Now this limiter works differently from normalization. Normalization lifts everything up uniformly, and the limiter targets the extreme peaks, the short, sharp spikes in the waveform that sit above everything else, and it pulls those down. Set the limit to around -3 or -4 and apply. You'll notice that the waveform becomes more even, and those sharp peaks are controlled, and the overall shape looks a lot more consistent. It's that evenness is what we're after. And then the third step here is just to run normalization again. So go back to Effect, hit Normalize, but this time set the peak to -1.5 dB instead of 0. This final step brings everything back up to near maximum volume, but with 2 important differences from where we started. The extreme peaks have already been controlled by the limiter, so the quieter moments in the mix have proportionally more presence now. The waveform looks fuller and more even, and by targeting a -1.5 dB rather than 0, we're leaving a small but deliberate margin at the top. That -1.5 decibel ceiling is something that I apply to every single mix that I publish. Now here's why that matters. If someone is listening to a run of your mixes, a playlist, or a long session on a train or in the gym, the last thing that they want is for the volume to jump up on one mix and drop back down on the next. Inconsistent levels are jarring, and they signal a lack of attention to detail. By keeping every mix at the same ceiling, you're creating a predictable, professional listening experience, and you're also not blasting the listener's speakers at full tilt. That -1.5 decibel headroom gives them a little room to turn it up or down as they like, and it's a small courtesy that your audience will appreciate even if they never consciously register it. Once the mastering is done, I drop in my stings and idents. An ident is a short voiceover that brands the mix. You've probably heard them at the start of my podcasts and radio shows, something like, hey, you're listening to Pull Velocity, or Pull Velocity is in the mix. Think of it like an audio watermark. So mine were actually recorded many years ago by a friend of mine, Venus Flytracks, who was very generous enough to lend her voice for it. And I've been using those same drops for about 15 years now. If you don't have someone in your circle with a great voice, then Fiverr is a solid option. There are voice artists on there at every price point, and you can have them record whatever it is that you need. A short, sharp drop for your mixes is a simple brief that you can give them, and it usually doesn't cost too much. Doing your own voiceover is an option as well, but I personally find that a little bit awkward. A fresh voice gives the whole thing a more polished and professional feel. So my approach is one ident at the very start of the mix, one at the end, and then one roughly every 20 minutes in between. The key thing is that the ident should sit subtly under the music. It should not compete with or overpower the mix. Think of it like a watermark, visible enough to register, but unobtrusive enough not to distract. I started using these originally to stop other people from lifting my mixes and passing them off as their own. Now that's still a good reason, but the bigger benefit over time has been branding. Every listener on every platform hears your name associated with your sound. With the editing and mastering complete, it's now time to export, and you need two files. You need a WAV file and an MP3. So let's look at the WAV file first. Keep this file, it is your master. Store it in your mix folder alongside everything else. Now we go to the MP3, and before you save, go into the metadata section, and this is worth doing properly. The metadata is the information embedded inside the file itself. Things like the artist's name, the track title, the album, the year, the genre. Search engines and streaming platforms read this data when your file is uploaded anywhere. If it's blank or incorrect, you're leaving discoverability on the table. So here's how I fill mine in. For artist, I put Paul Velocity, of course. The title is going to be Mix Sessions and then the episode number. The album is Mix Sessions. Track number, so this is going to be whatever this mix is in the series. The current year. For genre, pick house or whatever genre applies to your mix. And then in the comments, I'll put paulvelocity.com. Now, this last one might seem unnecessary, but here's the thinking. If someone downloads your mix and loads it into Serato or Recordbox or VLC, they're going to see your website address right there in the track info. Okay, so once that's filled in, click OK and set your MP3 bitrate. I use 256 kbps. I find that it's the sweet spot between audio quality and a manageable file size. Now you could go up to 320 kbps for the highest quality MP3, but the file size increase is noticeable, and in my experience, the difference in listening quality is marginal. Don't go below 192, because less than 192, the audio compression becomes very noticeable and your mixes are going to suffer for it. Hit export and you're done. So that's it for episode 4. We've trimmed the mix, we've applied normalization and limiting to get a polished, even waveform, dropped in our idents and exported both to a WAV and a properly tagged MP3. In the next episode, we're moving into the visual side of things, and we're going to create the artwork and the thumbnails that sit alongside the mix on every platform. I'll see you there.